And I know people like Tim Kaine are very desperate to show their wokeness, but the idea that the U.S. is somehow in some peculiar way responsible for slavery in the world really just shows his ignorance.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to discussion between Jeff Berkowitz and I. Jeff in Chicago. It's been a long time, Jeff, since you and I have had a chance to get together. In the meantime, we've had the whole Corona breakdown. We've had a 3-day legislative session, the first time that's happened, I think, in history. And of late, we've had quite a rebellion going on across the country.
Damn straight, Terry. We've got a lot of problems. You've mentioned a few. The great thing here today, folks, don't change anything. Stay with us because we got solutions. Anybody can talk about problems. The tough thing is for Terry and Jeff to come up with solutions. We have that. And we have some diversity of thought here. And we're going to show you we're going to show you that. We started out showing you Jason Riley from the Journal Editorial Report TV show. He's with the Wall Street Journal. He's with the Manhattan Institute. He is one of the few black conservatives. Well, there are a number of black conservatives in the country. What was he saying? He was saying simply this: don't say America is terrible. What was Tim Kaine saying? Senator Tim Kaine was saying, oh, America was just not involved with slavery. It created slavery. But Riley says that is just foolish. At the time we got involved with slavery, it had existed for thousands of years in the world, okay? It's a terrible thing. We've tried to correct it. We're still trying to correct it. But don't blame America first for everything, as the San Francisco Democrats did, as Gene Kirkpatrick said, 1984. Let's not repeat history. Let's lay out our problems. We're doing that now. Let's get solutions. Right, Terry?
So, Jeff, as everyone knows what's been going on around the country, it started with George Floyd being killed in Minnesota. We've had another shooting, another couple of shootings, and obviously people have been demonstrating not only in America but across the world. And so we are having this national conversation. Just last week as we taped this, a week ago, it was June 19th. The Illinois Channel covered that, one of those celebrations of that. Let's listen to what Chris Welch had to say, Representative Chris Welch from the Illinois legislature.
So as we march and continue to march, we're going to let people know what our demands are. Repeat after me. Our demand. Is for police accountability. Our demand is for investment in black communities. At least $1 billion in every black community. Our demand is for jobs and opportunity. Put our people to work. Because Black Lives Matter.
So that was Chris Welch, House Democrat, and he was talking about the need to reinvest in black communities. Just this past week, Jeff, I interviewed Paul Vallis, who said that 87% of homes on the south side and the west side of Chicago still have lead pipes that they have never had changed. That's just one example, perhaps, of where we do need to have some reinvestment in some of these poorer neighborhoods from a infrastructure standpoint. Paul Vallis also says that we talk about food deserts, there's also social service deserts. And while many people are saying that racism has been a problem holding back black communities, there's other black voices that say yes, but so what? You got to deal with it. One of those was recently interviewed on Fox News, Shelby Steele.
Black Americans have to begin to take our fate back into our own hands and move it to stop crying racism. There's a little racism out here, always was and always will be. Why is that an argument to stop, to not move forward?
Let's talk a little bit about. So what is Shelby Steele saying? He is saying simply this: blacks need to take their fate into their own hands. Stop crying racism, stop crying victimization, start thinking about what we, or what they, blacks, can do to help themselves. Okay? He's talking about the basics, the core values. He's talking about 75% wedlock. In the part of the clip we didn't show you, Steele mentions 75% out of wedlock births in the Black community, okay? I mean, we have to get back to the family. We have to get back to having a Black man present in the household. We have to get back in the rest of the clip he mentioned. He said, look, I'll start taking these demands seriously from Reverend Sharpton and Welsh and others when they start talking about reading to your kids before they go to sleep at night, okay? Because they have to be trained. They have to be educated so they can compete in the most of modern economies in the world. You do that by teaching them how to read. You do that by having inner city schools that perform. And if they don't perform, if they don't have more than 30% of their kids reading at grade level, which is a situation here at CPS, let's give them an out. Let's give them a choice. Okay? That's what he's saying.
You know, Jeff, there's a lot of discussion about racism. I would say, though, that we can't ignore some of this, what's going on. And of course, so much of what we're hearing is driven by a group, Black Lives Matter, or at least people are using that hashtag and discussing that. But again, there's other voices that saying you only want maybe certain Black lives to matter, and that if you want investment in communities, no one's going to invest in communities where there's rampant violence. Let's just take, you know, obviously Chicago here in Illinois is often cited as the premier example. And there are others, cities like Baltimore and others around the country, but Chicago, with its massive number of deaths and violence, we just recently had one of the most violent weekends ever. And let's listen to a little clip here from Fox 32 covering just one example of that violence.
3-year-old boy, just one of 4 children killed by gunfire in Chicago this Father's Day weekend. At least 60 people were shot in the city, 9 fatally as of Sunday morning.
Shut this west side down until we find out who discharged that weapon and took the life of this baby.
So the thing of it is, in this last Father's Day weekend, Terry, that clip was broadcast on Sunday morning. As of that time, I think they referred in the clip to like 60 shootings and 4 fatalities, all of whom were kids. In any case, by the end of the weekend, there were more than 100 shootings. I think there were 10 to 14 fatalities, something like that. 4 or 5 were kids, okay? These were innocent kids. These were not kids doing anything wrong, okay? Is that any way to raise kids? Is that any way to have a community? Where's the outrage, okay? We had one terrible, terrible, horrific incident. We've had several. I'm not saying it's the only one, but we had one in Minneapolis with the police, okay? With George Floyd. We had another in Atlanta. But we had just terrible incidents this past weekend of Black on Black crime, of homicides, okay, of children. Where's the outrage? Where's the accountability? Okay? Representative Welsh wants accountability. Mayor Lightfoot, where's her accountability? CPD, Chicago Police Department Chief David Brown, okay? Kim Fox, the state's attorney of Cook County, the top law enforcement officer there. Tony Preckwinkle, the Cook County Board President. Chief Judge Tim Evans, a bad bail policy. We keep apprehending people who are illegally using guns and they're out on the street in 6 hours. Who said that? I didn't say that. Mayor Lightfoot said that a year ago. And then what happened? She made a deal. She endorsed Kim Fox. She started talking about it. Where these folks, what did they all have in common? The people I mentioned, they are Black. Black lives matter. We want our Black politicians and our white politicians all to be accountable for the terrible things that are happening in the Black community, of which we just saw a few.
So who's to blame is open for discussion. Obviously, I think we're having this national discussion, and as also we try to cover this, we just had we have in the Congress a police reform measure that the Republicans are trying to pass in the Senate, but the Democrats in the House are not taking it up. They have their own bill. We'll have to see how that moves. You know, part of this effort, the American democracy, and the good thing is we're going to have criticisms on both sides, and that's good. I often tell people we need to have our critics because we're not always going to be right, so we need to listen to it. That doesn't mean our critics are always right, but hopefully we can hash this out. And Jeff, let's just we almost have to remind ourselves that we are in the middle of a presidential election. Certainly, this is going to be, that we've been discussing, one of the issues that will be on the mind of voters, but it's not the only one. The other one we're going to be looking at is, of course, the overall economy and the shutdown of the economy for the coronavirus. Here in Illinois, the finances of the city and of the state are and have been in desperate conditions. Recently, we had a friend of ours, Ted Dabrowski, being interviewed on a show called Capital Connections by WCIA here in the Springfield area. Let's listen to what Ted said as we move on to some of the economic issues.
And you don't have that in Indiana. You don't have that in Wisconsin. You don't have that in Texas, right? But in Illinois, if you move here, they might as well just hand you, here's $200,000 you need to repay over the next 30 years. I don't care about your mortgage. I don't care about your other costs. You need to pay taxes worth $200,000 because you moved to Illinois. Welcome.
So what is that? What does Ted mean when he says that $200,000 tax liability? Saying if we can recruit people, we need people coming to Illinois, they're leaving Illinois. If they step into Illinois, what do we give them? We give them a tax bill for $200,000. That is the pension liability. That's the $420 billion pension liability, everything thrown in there, divided among what he says are the households that could pay. Actually, maybe they could, maybe they couldn't pay higher taxes. People with earning more than $75,000. It's not everybody, because the people earning $50,000 probably can't pay any more taxes. But $200,000 divided over 30 years, that's $6,000. When you take the time value of money, you're probably talking $8,000 or $9,000 increase in taxes per year for the next 30 years. Can we pay that? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Nobody'd come here. They'd flee. The people don't have to stay here. So that is the problem. That's a pension problem. Where are the people talking about the pension problem and pension solutions? I don't hear them.
It is not enough, and the fact of the matter is the pension problem is at the state level, it's at the city level, and cities across, not just Chicago, municipalities across the state are struggling with their pensions for city workers, for fire and police especially. And this impacts everything, because it just means there's not enough money to go around to some of the other issues. And then we get in the whole area of discussion about government revenues, and should we be raising taxes, as the governor is trying to push with his progressive income tax. I interviewed a financially conservative Democrat who once ran for governor and ran with Pat Quinn as lieutenant governor earlier this week, Paul Vallis. And he had some interesting insights to say that how desperate it is that we address these financial issues being caused by the pensions. Let's take a listen.
They talk about the Chicago fire. This is the Great Illinois Fire. It's a financial fire, and it's going to burn the state down. So there has to be a grand compromise, and I think he is the person to do it. You have Democrat. I mean, you've got control of both houses.
Okay, so what, okay, he can make a deal. He's a Democrat. He can figure out, maybe Republicans can't handle this. Maybe they don't have the power to do it, but the Democrats do. Pritzker does. What's the deal? The deal is this. You can't pay that. These were over-generous benefits. Everybody wants to say it's all, we skip too many holidays, whatever. You can't pay these taxes. You're going to either have to amend the Constitution to allow the Illinois government to decrease these pension benefits. You're going to have to give power. You're going to ask the feds to give Illinois the right to file for bankruptcy. You don't want necessarily bankruptcy so much. That would allow you perhaps to force the unions to sit down at the table to restructure these pensions. Some people, Senate President Cullerton, if he lives to 95, he's going to get $4 million. Obviously, that's not the average, but that's a terrible thing. we've got to restructure these things and be progressive about it. Hit the people with the largest pensions the most, the people with more modest pensions the least. The point is, we got to do something. We got to address it. We need to have Democrats and Republicans talk about this, discuss it, and then legislate. It's simple, right?
Well, I don't know how simple it is, given that you have such competing interests for dollars in the state. Recently, we talked to Ted Dabrowski, who we saw earlier being interviewed. Of course, Ted with Wire Points. One of the people that really gets deep into the weeds on the budget issues, and so we and other journalists frequently talk to Ted. I recently had a chance to talk to him about the budget that was recently passed. Let's take a listen to that.
Every Illinoisan who has to pay these taxes, who's suffering, whose jobs have been cut, whose businesses have been shuttered, they deserve to know this stuff. And why, why it's a mystery, and why reporters are all reporting different numbers. Many are reporting 40 billion as the expenditure number. It's just not fair. And I think I guess it's part of the ridicule of Illinois, where we're not transparent and we're not professional about our finances. It's why we're almost junk rated, right?
That's not addressing the pension problem. Can't do everything all at once, but at least it could stop the hemorrhaging. It could stop the more deficits, the more borrowing. That's our budget. What you saw up there was a chart, a simplification of the fiscal year 2021 budget. What did it show you? Roughly $37 billion in revenue, $43 billion in expenditures. That's a problem. That's a $6 billion deficit. If you accounted for pensions in the actuarial correct way, you would actually know that we have, and pension healthcare benefits, you would know we have something closer to a $12 billion deficit. We can't keep doing this, folks. We got to deal with things realistically. We can't say if the governor's there, he's got to make some cuts. What's he doing? He's looking for the Federal Reserve, to borrow $5 billion to get through this deficit. Cannot keep borrowing. You've got to be realistic. Terrible thing that happened with COVID, but you've got to start having reforms. You've got to have cuts in spending. You've got to have truly balanced budgets. You've got to address pensions. Right, Terry?
Well, you got to do something, and the fact is, as we mentioned off the top, since we last talked, I think it was in January, Jeff, we had the whole COVID thing come in, and that came in out of the blue and put a major, obviously, dent, you might say, into the revenues coming into the state. As we speak, on what is today, the June 26th, Illinois is coming out of the shutdown. We are today, as of today, the first day into phase 4 of the reopening, which means we can start to go back to restaurants, we can start to go back to movie theaters and other things. And so hopefully this will allow the regeneration of new revenues. But as you mentioned, Jeff, we want to talk about the impact, and there's been obviously this controversy about whether or not we need to have shut down some of all the things that we did shut down. And when we talk about this, we look at the who has died by age groups, and it's predominantly been people at a much older rate. Let's take a look.
So as we look at that chart, the important thing there is that that is telling us one aspect of COVID. COVID is very much a disease of the elderly. It's also, when we get to this, a disease of nursing homes and a disease of comorbidities. But let's focus on that chart. As you can see, 86% of the coronavirus deaths in Illinois are with people of age 60 or older. Okay, 86%. Let's look at the other part of the spectrum. If you look at the left side of that chart, you'll see how many people are under 20 years of age, okay, and dying of COVID. 4, like 0.1%, less than 0.1%. So do we need to keep kids home from school? We decided to do it. Can we return the kids to school? We can discuss that, but we surely can. You're hearing things about younger kids being at risk or younger people. I haven't seen the data. We haven't seen it. We got to be data oriented. We got to be science oriented. If we are, let's return the kids to school. Let's keep the teachers who are older. Let's help them protect. Some may not be able to return because they could be infected by kids who have this disease but actually are not affected by it. So there are things we can do to return to normalcy. But we got to look at the data, as we just did. That's a chart from WirePoints. That's Ted Dabrowski and John Klingner and Mark Lennon. They're looking at the data. It's time for Governor Pritzker to look at the data. He says he does. Help Illinois recover as quickly and as ably and as healthy as they can, right?
Well, that's what the governor says, that he's looking at the data. And here's another piece of data, Jeff, that you can look at. It's that long-term residents make up just 0.8% of the Illinois population, but account for 53% of the COVID deaths. And when you're talking about long-term residents in basically nursing homes, they're not even in the workforce. So we're shutting down the economy to stop people from dying when most of these people, 53% of all the deaths, are those in nursing homes. Let's take a look.
You can see on the right side, 53% of our almost 7,000 deaths in Illinois from coronavirus, 53% or something like 3,400 of that 7,000 or so, it's not quite 7,000, approaching 7,000, are with people at nursing homes or long-term care facilities. It's a major problem. The governor says he tried, he did, it wasn't effective. We don't judge people just on the inputs, on the outcomes. Because we tried to concentrate on everybody, because we focused on bringing the kids home, we didn't focus enough on protecting the elderly and sick at nursing homes. We got to do that now. That's where the focus should be, okay? So I think we've seen, I don't know if we have that other cut of the cut that shows the comorbidity issue, okay? And looking around for mine to see whether, maybe Terry, you can find it, whether that's the important element there, that you can see 91% of the COVID-19 deaths in Cook County had comorbidities. They had an important, significant pre-existing condition, whether it was a pulmonary condition, whether it was obesity, whether it was asthma. There are just 4 or 5, and they have to be very significant. This is not talking about the entire population. These are talking, you have to go to your doctor and say, do I have a really, really significant condition that I just mentioned? If so, you've got a responsibility then to be very careful. If you fit in that category, you've got to figure out how do you protect yourself from people who have coronavirus, because it's not just getting coronavirus. What you want is make sure the people who get it are not so vulnerable that they're going to get very sick and die. Okay, so that is and again, the governor needs to tell the people the truth. This is another chart from Wire Points from Ted Dabrowski, but maybe he doesn't agree. Maybe Dr. Zeki doesn't agree. We need the clash of ideas. We need the clash. If he thinks something else and somebody else thinks somebody else, we can't hear from just one voice, because out of that will come truth, will come the best understanding of data and science, and then we can move forward and make Illinois safe. And as we're doing now, we can go ahead to face, well, actually, yeah, I think unless you've got something else, unless we have another cut I've forgotten, Terry, can we think about where do we go here now?
Well, a couple of things. Let me bring it up. First of all, the governor would say that, Governor Pritzker would say he's been doing this the right way. As we take this on Friday, June 26th, yesterday, the governor of Texas that had reopened the state said they're not moving forward with the next phase. This morning, the governor of Florida has said they're not moving forward with the next phase. Part of Wall Street is down because there has been a secondary wave of spikes in coronavirus cases. Now, some of this might be because we're all doing more testing and finding more. NBC News yesterday reported that the level of infections within the population might be 10 times more than we estimated. And if that's the case, it also brings down the death rate significantly. So you have competing data that you have to be looking at. Now, Governor Pritzker had some charts that he brought out yesterday that shows how the caseload for Illinois has consistently gone down. The number of hospitalizations and deaths have gone down. And so therefore, all 4 of the healthcare regions that he established are reopening today for phase 4. So Governor Pritzker would say that Illinois, unlike some of these other states that are having to put off the next phase, has done it right, and it's allowing us to reopen maybe a little later than some of these other states did. But he would say, as we now see, he would argue they're seeing the results of opening too soon by having a higher caseload. The other thing, while we have time, let's take a listen to the governor just recently talking about, of course, the whole issue of reopening the schools, and these kids have not been in the classroom for the last number of months. Let's see what the governor, had to say.
Based upon state guidance, each school district and each university will develop and implement a reopening plan that meets the needs of their community and the children that they serve. But on a large scale, these guidelines align with the broader requirements of Phase 4, including the wearing of masks or face coverings, a cap on 50-person gatherings in one space, the observance of social distancing wherever possible, and an increase in school-wide cleanings and disinfections, including symptom checks. It's important to note that this guidance is subject to adjustment pursuant to updated public health guidance and changing public health conditions. In the event of a dramatic reversal of local health metrics or a second wave of the virus at some point during the school year, schools and districts must also prepare for the potential need to return to remote instruction.
Okay, so the important thing, we got to have a discussion with the governor. These kids are going back. Almost surely they're not at risk. We haven't seen the data that's coming up recently that contends that. But more importantly, as we close out and we're dealing with this on June 26th, we're in Phase 4. What could we do to reinvigorate the economy in a healthy way? Is there anything? The main barriers we have left are 50% at retail. We have the social distancing for restaurants, which is very costly to them. Do we need that? Do we need the social distancing for bars? Do we need to have this limitation? We can't have any groups larger than 50. That means theaters, playhouses, very, very limited. Is that science? Is that data? That's what we got to focus on, because I think possibly not. Maybe we don't need social distancing. Maybe we don't even need masks for everybody. For those people at risk, we need masks. They can decide. They could decide on social distancing. We've got to focus our energies on the people who are most vulnerable and let the economy go, because we're killing people through the economy, through overdoses, through domestic violence. We're weighing human toll of one approach to the human toll of the other. The governor is focusing only on the human toll of COVID. He needs to focus on the human toll of the shutdown.
All right.
Balance that.
And Jeff, once again, we ran out of time, but thank you viewers for watching, and Jeff, we'll see you hopefully before too long.